The glint of silver coins cascading through her fingers felt like the last of her hopes falling away. Nora Owens stood outside the First National Bank of Rawhide, Nevada, her shoulders slumped in defeat as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty Main Street. The year was 1876, and the promise of a new life out west had soured faster than milk in August heat. The crunch of boots on gravel made her hastily wipe away a tear. Looking up, she found herself staring into the most startlingly blue eyes she'd ever seen, set in a weathered face beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "Madam," the tall cowboy said, his voice low and gentle like he was approaching a spooked mare. "Couldn't help but notice you seem troubled." "How much do you need?" Nora clutched her reticule tighter, pride battling desperation. "I don't accept charity from strangers, sir." A slight smile crossed his tanned face. "Name's Quinn Jenkins. There, now we ain't strangers." He extended a calloused hand. "And it ain't charity if you pay it back someday." She hesitated, studying him. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, his manner direct but respectful. Something about him radiated both danger and safety simultaneously. $200, she finally admitted, the words burning her throat. "The bank won't extend my loan. Without it, I'll lose everything." Quinn whistled low. "That's a fair sum." He glanced at the bank, then back to her. "Mind telling me what it's for?" "My brother's ranch," Nora said, squaring her shoulders. "He died 3 months ago, influenza. I came out from Boston to settle his affairs, but—" She gestured helplessly. "There are debts, repairs needed. I thought I could make a go of it, but Mr. Henderson in there doesn't think a woman alone can run a cattle operation." Quinn's jaw tightened. "Henderson's a fool, then." He reached inside his vest and pulled out a leather wallet. "I've got $73 on me. It's a start." Nora's eyes widened. "I can't possibly—" "You can and you will," he interrupted firmly. "I've got more at my camp, the rest." "Well, I've got some business in town tomorrow that should take care of it." He handed her the bills. "Where's this ranch of yours?" "North Creek." "About 7 miles east of town," she replied automatically, still staring at the money in her hand. "Mr. Jenkins, I don't know how to thank you." "Quinn," he corrected. "And thank me by being at your ranch tomorrow afternoon. I'll bring the rest then." His eyes crinkled at the corners. "And maybe you could spare a cup of coffee for a weary traveler." For the first time in weeks, Nora felt a genuine smile form. "I think I can manage that." As Quinn tipped his hat and turned to leave, Nora called after him. "Why would you help a stranger this way?" He paused, looking back over his shoulder. "Let's just say I've been where you are, madam. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to bet on you when nobody else will." With that, he continued down the street toward the Rusty Spur Saloon. Nora watched him go, wondering what kind of man would offer such help with so little hesitation. She had no way of knowing that Quinn Jenkins was no ordinary cowboy, nor that his arrival in Rawhide would change her life forever. The ride back to North Creek Ranch was quiet, but for the steady plodding of her horse's hooves and the occasional distant cry of a hawk. Nora's mind was occupied with thoughts of the mysterious cowboy. She'd encountered plenty of men since arriving in Nevada 3 months ago, most of them looking at her as either a curiosity or an opportunity. None had looked at her the way Quinn Jenkins had, like she was a person worthy of respect and capable of achieving what she'd set out to do. The ranch came into view as she crested the last hill, a modest affair with a 2-story main house, a barn in need of fresh paint, and several outbuildings spread across the property. It wasn't grand, but it was good land with a reliable creek running through it, enough to support the small herd her brother Thomas had built up before his untimely death. As she dismounted in front of the house, Nora caught sight of the older man emerging from the barn. "Miss Owens," George Winters called, wiping his hands on a rag. The ranch foreman had been with Thomas for years and had stayed on, despite the uncertainty of whether Nora would sell or try to run the place herself. "Any luck at the bank?" Nora sighed. "Mr. Henderson remains unmoved by my business proposal." George's bushy eyebrows knitted together. "That old skinflint. Your brother would have, I know," she interrupted gently. "But I may have found another solution." She briefly explained her encounter with Quinn Jenkins, careful not to sound too hopeful. George scratched his gray beard thoughtfully. "Jenkins, you say? Don't recall that name around these parts." "He seems to be passing through," Nora said, leading her horse toward the barn. "But he's offered to help, and I'm not in a position to refuse." "Just be careful, miss. Men out here." He trailed off. "I know, George. I'll be cautious." She patted her horse's neck. "How are things here?" Found another break in the north fence line. "Fixed it temporary-like, but we'll need proper supplies. And that bay mare's looking close to foaling." Nora nodded, mentally adding these items to her growing list of ranch concerns. After caring for her horse, she walked up to the house, her steps a little lighter than they'd been that morning. $73 wouldn't save the ranch, but it was something a beginning. And for the first time since the bank had denied her loan application, she felt a flicker of hope. Inside, she moved around the kitchen, preparing a simple supper. The house still felt like Thomas's rather than her own, masculine in its sparse furnishings, practical rather than comfortable. She'd made few changes since arriving, partly out of respect for her brother's memory, and partly because she hadn't known if she'd be staying. As darkness fell, Nora sat on the front porch with a cup of tea, staring out at the vast expanse of land stretching away from the house. Stars began to appear in the clear sky, more stars than she'd ever seen in Boston. Thomas had loved this place fiercely. In his letters, he described the freedom of the open range, the satisfaction of building something with his own hands. She hadn't understood then, but she was beginning to. "I'm trying, Thomas," she whispered to the night air. "I'm really trying." Dawn broke early over Rawhide, painting the sky in delicate strokes of pink and gold. Quinn Jenkins had spent the night in a room above the saloon, sleeping fitfully as he always did in towns. He preferred the open range, where a man could hear trouble approaching from a distance. Cities, even small ones like Rawhide, made him feel boxed in. He rose, washed, and dressed methodically. The weight of his Colt revolver at his hip was reassuring as he checked his appearance in the small, spotted mirror. At 34, his face showed the marks of a life lived outdoors, lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun, a small scar along his jaw from a barbed wire fence. His dark hair was in need of a trim, but it would have to wait. After a hearty breakfast at the hotel dining room, Quinn made his way to the Lucky Strike, the larger of the town's two saloons. Even at this early hour, a few dedicated gamblers were gathered around the tables. Quinn scanned the room until he spotted his quarry, a heavy-set man with a flashy gold watch chain stretched across his vest. "Morning, Delaney," Quinn said, pulling out a chair. The man looked up, momentary confusion giving way to recognition and then poorly concealed alarm. "Jenkins. What brings you to Rawhide? Heard you've been doing well for yourself." Quinn signaled to the bartender for a whiskey. "Thought I'd see if my luck might change at your tables." "Always welcome," Delaney said, though his eyes darted nervously toward the door. 3 hours later, Quinn emerged from the saloon with considerably heavier pockets. He wasn't proud of the methods he'd employed, card skills honed through years of playing with men far more skilled than Delaney, but he'd needed the money quickly. It wasn't exactly cheating, he told himself. Just using every advantage at his disposal. After collecting his horse from the livery, Quinn made one more stop at the general store, purchasing supplies including coffee, sugar, and a bolt of pretty blue calico fabric that had caught his eye. An impulse purchase, something he rarely indulged in, but he found himself wanting to bring something more than just money to Nora Owens. The ride to North Creek Ranch gave him time to think. Quinn hadn't planned on staying in Rawhide long, just passing through on his way to California. But something about the determined woman with the honey-brown eyes and the stubborn chin had resonated with him. He recognized that look of someone backed into a corner but refusing to give up. He'd been in that position himself more times than he cared to count. Life had taught him early that people could disappear from your world in an instant. His parents to cholera when he was 12, his brother to the war, his fiancée Mary to another man while Quinn was away driving cattle. Each loss had pushed him further west, seeking something he couldn't quite name. North Creek Ranch came into view just as Quinn had started to wonder if he'd missed the turn. It was a modest spread, nothing like the vast cattle empires further south, but the land looked good, rolling hills with plenty of grass, a line of trees marking what must be the creek. As he approached the main house, Quinn noticed the careful repairs, the swept yard, the mended corral fence. Someone was taking pains to keep the place up despite limited resources. A large, older man emerged from the barn, eyeing Quinn suspiciously as he dismounted. "Afternoon," Quinn called. "I'm looking for Miss Owens." "And who might you be?" The man's hand rested near his hip, not quite threatening but definitely cautious. "Quinn Jenkins. Miss Owens and I spoke in town yesterday." Recognition dawned on the weathered face. "The bank fella. Miss Nora mentioned you might be coming by." He extended his hand. "George Winters. I run the day-to-day here." They shook hands, each taking the measure of the other. George's grip was strong despite his age, his eyes sharp beneath bushy brows. "She around?" Quinn asked, glancing toward the house, checking on a mare about to foal. George nodded toward a smaller barn to the east. "You can head on over. I'll see to your horse." Quinn thanked him and walked toward the indicated building, his boots crunching on the hard, packed earth. Inside, he paused to let his eyes adjust to the dimmer light. Soft murmuring drew him to a stall where Nora knelt beside a chestnut mare, her skirts spread around her, sleeves rolled up past her elbows. "Steady, girl," she was saying. "Not much longer now." Quinn cleared his throat softly so as not to startle her or the horse. Nora looked up, a strand of hair falling across her face as she did so. Something shifted in Quinn's chest at the sight of her capable hands, determined expression, and those eyes that seemed to reflect gold in the shafts of sunlight streaming through the barn windows. "Mr. Jenkins," she said, a smile breaking across her face. "You came. Said I would." He moved closer, crouching down near the stall. "How's she doing? Making progress? This is her first foal." Nora turned back to the mare, stroking her neck soothingly. "She's been laboring since dawn." Quinn studied the animal with a practiced eye. "Looks like she's in good hands." For the next hour, they worked together quietly, Nora clearly knowing what she was doing but accepting Quinn's occasional suggestions. When the foal finally emerged, a leggy black colt with a white blaze, they shared a moment of triumph that felt strangely intimate. "He's perfect," Nora whispered, watching the mare nuzzle her newborn. "You've done this before," Quinn observed. She nodded. "My father raised horses back in Massachusetts. Not ranch stock like these, but the principles are the same." She stood, brushing straw from her skirt. "I should get you that coffee I promised. You must be parched." As they walked toward the house, Quinn reached into his saddlebag. "I brought the rest of the money and a few supplies." He handed her the bundle. Nora unfolded the calico, her fingers tracing the pattern. "It's lovely," she said softly, "but unnecessary." Thought it might brighten things up. Quinn felt suddenly awkward like a schoolboy. The ranch house seemed a bit stark. Her eyes met his, surprised and something else he couldn't read. That's very thoughtful, thank you. Inside, the house was simple but clean. Quinn waited in the small parlor while Nora prepared coffee, taking in the few personal touches, a daguerreotype of a serious-looking man who must be her brother, a shelf of well-worn books, a fancy teacup on the mantel that seemed out of place among the frontier practicality. "My mother's," Nora said, noticing his gaze as she returned with the coffee. "The only thing I brought from home, really. Silly, I suppose." "Not silly at all." Quinn accepted the steaming cup. "We all need reminders of where we come from." They settled into chairs opposite each other, an awkward silence falling between them. Finally, Nora spoke. "I feel I should explain more about my situation." "No need," Quinn began, but she shook her head. "I want to. You've been kind enough to help me. You deserve to know why." She took a breath. "Thomas and I were always close, despite the 9 years between us. When our parents died 5 years ago, he'd already established himself out here. I stayed in Boston, teaching at a ladies' academy." She sipped her coffee before continuing. "Thomas wrote regularly tales of ranch life, the characters in town, his plans for expanding the herd. When his letters stopped suddenly, I knew something was wrong. By the time I received word of his death, he'd been gone 2 weeks." Quinn watched her face, noting the grief still fresh beneath her composure. "I came intending to sell the ranch and return east, but once here." She gestured around them. "This was his dream. He built something good here, and I discovered I don't want to let it go." Her voice strengthened. "I can make this work. I've learned so much these past months. George has been teaching me the cattle business. I understand why the bank is reluctant, but—" "Henderson's a fool," Quinn interrupted. "You've got good instincts. I saw that today with the mare." She smiled genuinely. "Thank you for that, and for this." She touched the envelope containing the money. "I'll repay you every cent." "I know you will." He set down his empty cup. "What will you do next?" "Pay off the most pressing debts. Buy supplies to repair the north fence line properly. Hire another hand or two for the roundup next month." She spoke with increasing animation, clearly having thought this through carefully. "The herd's small but healthy. If we can get through this season, next year will be better." Quinn found himself admiring her practical approach. "Sounds like you have a plan." "I do." She hesitated. "Mr. Jenkins, Quinn, I don't mean to pry, but what brings you to Rawhide? You don't seem like a man who normally hands money to strangers." It was a fair question. Quinn considered how much to reveal. "I've been drifting for some time. Was heading to California, heard about some land opportunities there." He shifted in his chair. "As for why I helped, let's just say I know what it's like to have your back against the wall, and I had the means to do something about it." Nora studied him, seeming to sense there was more to the story, but she nodded, accepting his answer for now. "Well, I'm grateful our paths crossed." Their conversation continued as afternoon stretched toward evening. Quinn found himself telling her about his years as a trail boss, driving cattle from Texas to Kansas, about the characters he'd met and places he'd seen. Nora shared stories of Boston, of teaching young ladies who would rather discuss the latest fashions than arithmetic, of her gradual disillusionment with city life. As twilight deepened, George appeared at the door. "Miss Nora, I've put Mr. Jenkins's horse in the barn for the night." Weather's turning. Quinn looked outside, noticing for the first time the dark clouds gathering on the horizon. "Looks like a storm coming. I should head back to town." "Nonsense," Nora said firmly. "We have a perfectly good guest room. I won't hear of you riding in that." As if to emphasize her point, a distant rumble of thunder sounded. Despite his protests, Quinn found himself accepting her invitation to dinner and lodging for the night. George joined them at the table, the conversation flowing easily among the three of them. Quinn observed the easy rapport between Nora and her foreman, respectful but comfortable, like family rather than employer and employee. After dinner, George retired to his quarters in one of the outbuildings, leaving Quinn and Nora alone. The storm had arrived in earnest, rain lashing against the windows as they sat in the parlor, lamplight casting a warm glow. "May I ask you something personal?" Nora said suddenly. Quinn tensed slightly but nodded. "You mentioned being a trail boss, but that doesn't explain." She hesitated. "The way you carry yourself, the gun, you're more than just a cowhand, aren't you?" He was silent so long that Nora began to apologize. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. No, it's a fair question." Quinn looked down at his hands. "I've been many things. Cowhand, trail boss, scout for the Army during the war. For a time I rode with the Rangers in Texas." He met her eyes steadily. "And yes, I've used this gun more than I care to remember." "Are you running from something?" Her direct question surprised him. A small, humorless smile crossed his face. "Not in the way you're thinking. No laws after me, if that's your concern." "It wasn't," she said simply. Quinn found himself wanting to tell her more than he'd told anyone in years. "After the war, I drifted, took jobs that needed the skills I had. Some of those jobs, well, they're not things I'm proud of. We all have regrets," Nora said softly. "Some more than others." Quinn stood, moving to the window to watch the storm. 3 years ago, I was hired to help clear some homesteaders off land a cattle baron wanted. Didn't know that's what it was at first, was told they were squatters causing trouble." His voice grew distant. "By the time I realized the truth, things had gone too far. A man died. He had a family, wife, children." Nora remained silent, letting him continue at his own pace. "I've been trying to find my way back from that ever since." He turned to face her. "So I help where I can, try to balance the scales a bit." The confession hung in the air between them. Quinn waited for the judgment he'd come to expect, the hardening of expression, the subtle withdrawal. Instead, Nora rose and crossed to stand before him. "Thank you for telling me," she said simply. "I think a man should be measured by his efforts to right his wrongs, not just by the wrongs themselves." Something tight in Quinn's chest loosened at her words. "You're a rare woman, Nora Owens." "Not so rare," she replied with a small smile. "Just one who's learned that life is rarely as simple as we wish it to be." She moved toward the hall. "I should show you to your room. It's been a long day for both of us." As Quinn followed her up the narrow staircase, he found himself wondering what it might be like to stay in one place for a while. The thought should have made him restless, it always had before. But tonight, with the storm raging outside and this remarkable woman leading him to shelter, the idea held an unexpected appeal. Morning arrived with cleared skies and a renewed sense of purpose. Quinn woke early, habit driving him from bed despite the comfort of the guest room. He found George in the barn, already seeing to the morning chores. "Thought I might make myself useful while I'm here," Quinn offered, rolling up his sleeves. "Been a while since I did honest ranch work." George sized him up before nodding. "North fence line could use a proper reinforcing." Storm probably didn't help matters. For the next several hours, Quinn worked alongside the older man, appreciating his straightforward manner and vast knowledge of the ranch operations. George, for his part, seemed to warm to Quinn as they labored together, eventually sharing stories of his 20 years working with Thomas Owens. "He was a good man," George said as they paused for water. "Had big dreams for this place. Planned to expand north where the grazing's better. Just needed time." "And his sister?" Quinn asked. Think she can make a go of it? George considered the question seriously. Never met a more determined woman. She's smart, learns quick. Folks in town underestimate her because she talks fancy and wears those Eastern dresses. He chuckled. But I've seen her pull a calf in the middle of the night, mend fences till her hands bled, and outride men half her age. Quinn nodded, having glimpsed those qualities himself. Problem is, George continued, this is hard country for anyone alone, man or woman. Needs partners, neighbors you can count on. He fixed Quinn with a direct look. You planning on staying around these parts? The question caught Quinn off guard. Was heading to California, he said automatically. George just grunted, returning to work. But the question lingered in Quinn's mind as they finished the fence repairs and moved on to other tasks. By mid-afternoon, when they returned to the ranch house, Quinn had made a decision. He found Nora in the kitchen, preparing a stew for dinner. Smells good, he said from the doorway. She turned, a smile lighting her face. George worked you hard, I see. Quinn glanced down at his dirt-stained clothes and laughed. Nothing I couldn't handle. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something. Nora wiped her hands on her apron, giving him her full attention. What is it? I've been thinking about your situation here. The ranch has potential, but you need more hands, especially with Roundup coming. He took a breath. I'd like to stay on for a while, help you get through this season. No wages necessary, just room and board. Surprise flashed across her face. What about California? It's been there a long time. It'll wait a bit longer. He met her gaze steadily. Unless you'd rather I moved on. No, she said quickly, then composed herself. I mean, I'd be grateful for the help, truly, but I can't accept your labor without proper compensation. How about this? I help get the ranch on solid footing and we consider my investment repaid. He stepped further into the kitchen. I know cattle, Nora, and I know what it takes to make a ranch work. Let me help. She studied him for a long moment. Why would you do this? Quinn considered his words carefully. Maybe I'm tired of drifting. Maybe I'd like to be part of building something for once instead of just passing through. He hesitated. And maybe I'd like to get to know you better without the pressure of time running out. A blush rose to her cheeks, but she didn't look away. That seems fair, she said finally. Partners then, for the season. Partners. Quinn felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. When do we start? We already have, Nora replied with a smile. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that surprised Quinn with its naturalness. Mornings began early with chores divided between the three of them. Quinn took over much of the heavy labor, freeing George to focus on the cattle and Nora to manage the business aspects of the ranch. Together, they hired 2 additional hands, young brothers named Illy and Samuel Tucker, who had solid references from a neighboring spread. With the extra help, they began preparing for the spring roundup, when they would gather, brand, and count the herd. Quinn found himself watching Nora whenever opportunity allowed. She approached each day with quiet determination, never complaining about the hardships of ranch life. In the evenings, she would often sit on the porch with account books, meticulously tracking every penny spent and earned. Sometimes they would talk late into the night about books they'd read, places they'd seen, dreams they'd once had. 2 weeks after Quinn's arrival, they rode together to check on the herd grazing in the north pasture. The day was perfect, clear blue skies, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers. As they crested a hill overlooking the valley, Nora reined her horse to a stop. This was Thomas's favorite spot, she said, gazing out at the panoramic view. He said on clear days, you could see all the way to the future from here. Quinn smiled at the sentiment. Your brother sounds like he was quite a character. He was. Sadness flickered across her face. I miss him every day, but especially in moments like this. He loved this land so completely. I can see why, Quinn said, taking in the vista rolling hills carpeted with spring grass, the silver ribbon of North Creek winding through the valley, cattle dotting the landscape like toys. It gets under your skin. They fell silent, companionably watching a hawk circle overhead. Finally, Nora spoke again. Quinn, may I ask you something? Anything? What happened to make you start drifting? You mentioned your parents died young, but there seems to be more. The directness of her question didn't surprise him anymore. It was her way, honest, straightforward. Quinn took a deep breath, realizing he wanted her to know. I was engaged once, he said. Back in Texas before the war, Mary Sutton. We grew up together, planned to marry when I returned from my first big cattle drive. He adjusted his hat, shading his eyes from the sun. I was gone 6 months. When I got back, she was 2 months married to the banker's son. Nora winced. I'm sorry. Ancient history now, Quinn shrugged, though the memory still held a sting. After that, I joined the Rangers, then the Confederate Army when war came. By the time it was over, there wasn't much left to go home to, so I didn't. And you've been moving ever since. Until now. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Nora looked away first, a flush coloring her cheeks. We should check on the western herd before heading back. As they rode, Quinn found himself wondering what it would be like to stay, not just for a season, but permanently. To build something with this remarkable woman who faced each challenge with such grace and determination. It was a dangerous line of thinking, one that could lead to disappointment. Yet he couldn't seem to stop the thoughts from forming. Spring roundup arrived with a flurry of activity. For 10 days, the ranch was a hive of constant motion, riders bringing in cattle from the far reaches of the property, branding calves, separating those ready for market. Quinn fell naturally into the role of foreman, directing the work alongside George, whose knowledge of the herd was invaluable. Nora worked as hard as any of them, refusing to be sidelined because of her gender. Quinn noticed the young hand's initial skepticism give way to respect as they witnessed her skill with horses and her unflinching approach to even the dirtiest tasks. On the final evening of roundup, with the work successfully completed, an account of cattle that exceeded Nora's cautious estimates, they celebrated around a bonfire. George produced a fiddle, surprising everyone with lively tunes that had the Tucker brothers demonstrating surprisingly nimble footwork. Even the usually reserved Nora laughed and clapped along. Later, as the gathering quieted and the hands drifted toward their bedrolls, Quinn found Nora sitting alone on the porch steps of the main house, gazing up at the stars. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, settling beside her. "I was thinking about Thomas," she admitted. "How proud he'd be to see the ranch thriving again." "He would be," Quinn agreed. "You've accomplished a lot in a short time." "Not alone," she said, turning to look at him. "I couldn't have done it without you, Quinn." The moonlight cast silver highlights in her hair, loosened from its usual practical bun. Quinn felt an overwhelming urge to touch it, to see if it was as soft as it looked. Instead, he kept his hands firmly on his knees. "You'd have found a way," he said. "You're the most capable woman I've ever met." "Is that all I am, capable?" There was something in her voice, a vulnerability he rarely heard from her. Quinn chose his words carefully. "You're extraordinary, Nora. Strong, intelligent, beautiful." He took a breath. "Being around you these past weeks has made me question everything about the life I've been living." Her eyes widened slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm not sure I want to keep drifting anymore." He turned to face her fully. "I'm not sure I want to leave when the season's over." The silence stretched between them, filled with possibility. Then, with a courage that reminded him why he admired her so much, Nora reached out and took his hand. "Then don't," she said simply. Quinn looked down at their joined hands, marveling at how right it felt. People will talk. A woman alone with a man not her husband. Let them talk. A smile played at the corners of her mouth. Besides, there are ways to address such concerns if the man in question were inclined toward more permanent arrangements. His heart hammered in his chest as he understood her meaning. Are you proposing to me, Nora Owens? I'm suggesting you might consider proposing to me, she countered, a teasing light in her eyes. When you're ready. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, Quinn raised his hand to her cheek. When she leaned into his touch, he felt something shift and settle inside him. I think, he said softly, that I might be ready sooner than either of us expected. And then he was kissing her, gently at first, then with growing passion as she responded. Her arms wound around his neck, drawing him closer. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. I never thought I'd find a home again, he whispered, let alone someone to share it with. Nora's smile was radiant in the moonlight. We'll build it together. The town of Rawhide buzzed with gossip when word spread of Quinn Jenkins and Nora Owens' engagement. Some approved, seeing the practical advantages of the match. Others whispered about the mysterious Cowboy's past and the Boston woman's unconventional ways. But as spring turned to summer, even the most determined gossips had to admit the pair seemed well suited. Henderson at the bank was particularly disgruntled when Nora arrived to pay off the remainder of her loan, 3 months ahead of schedule. The cattle sale had been more profitable than expected, and with Quinn's guidance, they had negotiated better prices than North Creek Ranch had ever received before. I'll need to speak with your fiancé about future ranch business, Henderson said stiffly. Nora smiled pleasantly. My fiancé and I manage our affairs together, Mr. Henderson, but I'll continue handling the banking matters. I find I have quite a head for figures. She enjoyed the look of surprise on the banker's face as she gathered her receipt and turned to leave. Outside, Quinn waited with the wagon. How did the old buzzard take it? He asked as he helped her up to the seat. About as well as could be expected, she laughed. But he took our money readily enough. They completed their errands in town, efficiently supplies for the ranch, materials to repair the roof of the main house, and one special stop at the dressmaker's shop, where Nora was fitted for her wedding dress. Quinn waited outside for that particular errand, tipping his hat to townsfolk as they passed. Jenkins, a voice called. Quinn turned to see Sheriff Davis approaching, his expression serious. Sheriff, Quinn acknowledged, tensing slightly. Got a telegram about you, Davis said, keeping his voice low. From Texas Rangers. Quinn's hand instinctively moved toward his gun before he caught himself. What did it say? Davis studied him for a moment. Said you were cleared in that business with the Harker family. Witness came forward, confirmed your story about trying to prevent the violence. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. Thought you might want to know. Relief washed over Quinn as he accepted the telegram. I appreciate this. The sheriff nodded. You've made a good impression here. Done right by the Owens woman, helping her make that ranch profitable again. He started to walk away, then turned back. Past is past, Jenkins. We all deserve a fresh start. Quinn watched him go, the telegram clutched in his hand like a precious thing. When Nora emerged from the shop minutes later, she immediately noticed his expression. What is it? What's happened? He handed her the telegram, watching as she read it quickly. Quinn, this is wonderful news. It feels like the last piece falling into place, he admitted. Like I can finally stop looking over my shoulder. On the ride back to the ranch, they talked about the future plans to expand the herd, improve the breeding stock, perhaps add sheep the following year as Nora had suggested. The conversation flowed naturally between them, two partners building a shared vision. As they approached North Creek, the setting sun gilded the landscape, turning ordinary fields and fences into something magical. Quinn found himself memorizing the moment, the weight of Nora beside him on the wagon seat, the scent of her lavender soap, the way the light caught in her hair. "I love you," he said suddenly, the words emerging without premeditation. Nora turned to him, surprise giving way to radiant happiness. "I love you too," she replied, as though it was the most natural thing in the world. And perhaps it was, Quinn thought. Perhaps love was as simple as finding the person who made you want to stop running, who saw your flaws and believed in you anyway. The wedding took place on a perfect autumn day, with the aspens turning gold along the creek. They kept it small, George standing up as Quinn's best man. The Tucker brothers scrubbed clean and uncomfortable in their Sunday clothes. A few neighboring ranchers and their wives. The Reverend from Rawhide officiating in the front yard of what would now officially be their home together. Nora wore a simple gown of cream-colored silk, her hair adorned with wildflowers rather than a formal veil. Quinn thought she had never looked more beautiful than when she walked toward him across the yard, her eyes never leaving his face. The celebration afterward was lively, George's fiddle joined by one of the neighbors' concertinas. Plates of food spread across tables set up under the trees. Children running and playing between the adults' legs. As evening approached, Quinn found himself standing slightly apart, watching his new wife laughing with their guests. "She's something special," George said, appearing at his side with 2 glasses of whiskey. He handed one to Quinn. "That she is," Quinn agreed, accepting the drink. "I'm a lucky man." "You both are lucky," George corrected. "Found each other when you needed it most." He raised his glass. To Thomas, he'd be pleased to see his sister so happy and his ranch in good hands. Quinn clinked his glass against the older man's. To Thomas. As the party wound down and guests departed, Quinn and Nora stood on the porch, waving until the last wagon disappeared down the drive. Then, in a swift movement that made her laugh with delight, Quinn swept her into his arms. "Mrs. Jenkins," he said, carrying her toward the doorway. "Welcome home." Later, as moonlight streamed through the bedroom window, they lay tangled together in the quiet aftermath of their lovemaking. Nora's head rested on Quinn's chest, her finger tracing idle patterns through the light dusting of hair there. "What are you thinking?" she murmured. Quinn stroked her bare shoulder, still amazed that this remarkable woman was now his wife. "I was thinking about that day in front of the bank," he said. "How close I came to just walking past." "But you didn't," she pointed out. "You stopped. You asked how much I needed." "Best decision I ever made," he said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Though I didn't know then that what I needed most was standing right in front of me." Nora rose up on one elbow to look at him, her hair falling like a curtain around them. "We saved each other, I think." "I think you're right." Quinn pulled her down for a tender kiss. "And I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it." In the years that followed, North Creek Ranch prospered under their joint stewardship. The original herd doubled, then tripled in size. They added sheep, as Nora had suggested, finding a lucrative market for wool. New outbuildings went up, the main house was expanded, and the reputation of the Jenkins-Owens operation spread throughout the territory. 2 years after their wedding, Nora gave birth to a son they named Thomas, in honor of her brother. The boy had his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit, toddling around the ranch on sturdy legs almost as soon as he could walk. When Thomas was 3, a daughter joined the family, Elizabeth, called Ellie, with a laugh that could charm the birds from the trees and a fearlessness that kept her parents constantly vigilant. Life wasn't always easy. There were harsh winters that threatened the herd, drought summers that tested their reserves, the ordinary challenges of building a life together. But through it all, Quinn and Nora faced each obstacle as they had from the beginning, side by side, partners in every sense. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they stood once more on Thomas's favorite hill, looking out over what they had built together. The ranch had expanded, now encompassing the northern lands that Thomas had once dreamed of acquiring. The creek had been dammed to create a small reservoir, ensuring water even in the driest months. The herd was among the finest in the territory. "Did you ever imagine this?" Nora asked, leaning against Quinn's side. At 38, she was more beautiful than ever to him, confidence and contentment having added a depth to her beauty that the young woman outside the bank had only hinted at. "Not even in my wildest dreams," Quinn admitted, his arm around her waist. At 44, he had found the contentment that had eluded him for so long. The restlessness that had driven him for years had been replaced by a deep satisfaction in the life they had created together. From the ranch house below, they could hear the sounds of their children playing, George's distinctive laugh as he no doubt indulged their latest scheme. The old foreman had become like a grandfather to Thomas and Ellie, teaching them to ride, to recognize animal tracks, to respect the land that sustained them. "When I think about that day in front of the bank," Nora said, "how close I came to giving up." Quinn turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "But you didn't. That's who you are, Nora. You don't give up." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "It's one of the many reasons I love you. And you?" she asked, her eyes searching his. "Do you ever miss the wandering life?" Quinn considered the question seriously, as he always did when Nora asked something of him. "I thought I would," he admitted, "but what I was looking for all those years I found here." He gestured to the ranch, the land, and most importantly to her. "This is where I belong." Nora rose on tiptoe to kiss him, a gesture as familiar now as breathing, yet still capable of stirring his heart. "Come on," she said, taking his hand. "The children will be wondering where we've gone." As they walked back toward the house, Quinn reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought him to this moment. A chance encounter outside a bank, a woman who needed help, a decision to stop rather than pass by. From such small beginnings, a lifetime had unfolded. "Race you to the creek," Nora suddenly challenged, picking up her skirts and darting ahead with a laugh. Quinn grinned, watching her for a moment before giving chase. They might have responsibilities, a ranch to run, children to raise, but they had never lost the joy they found in each other, the sense of possibility that had sparked between them from the very beginning. And as he caught up to her by the water's edge, spinning her around while she laughed breathlessly, Quinn Jenkins knew with absolute certainty that he had found far more than he had ever sought on that fateful day in Rawhide. He had found his way home.